Hello, Dr. Baram. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mudassir. I'm very well.
Thank you for giving us time and sparing this time for us. How is everything around you? Everything is going normalized now?
Well, we have some crisis today in Jerusalem, but let's hope it will be okay. We are
Yeah,
trying it. The Israeli side is very unhappy about any problems in Jerusalem, but there are some people who would like to have some problems on the other side. So I just hope it will calm down within a day or two.
yeah, sure. We will. We are also praying for the betterment of humankind, and every human being should be live in peace. Uh,
Absolutely,
we are praying for
absolutely.
that. And there are some serious political crises are going on as well.
Well, in Israel, we have a crisis that has been lasting for the last almost 2 years.
Hmm.
We had four elections for parliament, and the results were undecisive. And now maybe there will be a government, but maybe not. So we should have to go for another elections campaign, which is terrible.
Hmm. That's quite difficult. But one thing is going good that Israel is among few nations which is now coming out of pandemic zone and fighting with Corona, and they have a great success story. Right? You have not facing any lockdowns anymore.
Yes, social and economic life is back 99.5%.
Oh,
Yes.
that's great. That's
Uh,
great.
we are just hopeful that we shall have no new virus, variety coming up, because right
Mm,
now everything is under control. Yes.
that's better. That's better. So we are discussing today the challenges of Iraq, right?
Yes.
I would like to know a little about the background there. Let's start from 2003 or a little back. We can
Okay.
start from the first Gulf War. Uh,
Sure. Uh, well, you see, the people of Iraq have been going through huge difficulties and even tragedies. Uh, I would say maybe beginning in the 1980. Until 1980, the Ba'ath regime under Saddam Hussein was dictatorial, but the economy was developing, was moving forward. By 1980, Saddam Hussein decided to invade Iran. He had a strong army. The Iranians, Ayatollah Khomeini, has almost completely destroyed his military. So Saddam felt that he had a military advantage, which in a way he had, but far less than he thought he did. And the war lasted for 8 years. This war was devastating for both sides. On the Iraqi side, perhaps three, 400,000 people died in the war. This is a very large number. We even don't know today exactly how many. On the Iranian side, perhaps 500,000, perhaps more. In Iraq, the economy was completely ruined, especially in the southern part of Iraq, south of Baghdad, all the way to Basra and the Persian Gulf, because most of the battles took place right there. And so, right after the ceasefire in August of 1988, the war ended, but the economic suffering began big time. And it was a tremendous economic crisis, huge unemployment. Saddam couldn't even release his whole army, military, his whole, let's say, reserves army into the economy, because the economy was completely uh, frozen. And the way Saddam decided to solve this problem, as we all remember, is to conquer Kuwait. Now that was even a greater, not a greater, but the same kind of disaster, maybe equal measures. And he lost the war against America and the coalition. America Arabs, Europeans, others. He lost the war, of course. And then you had a huge Shia revolt. As the Shia are perhaps 50%, 52, 54% of the Iraqi population, and they live mostly in the south and in Baghdad. So the south was up in arms, on fire, the whole south. Let's say if you go 60, 70 kilometers south of Baghdad, all the way to Basra, which is a few hundred kilometers south, it was on fire. Saddam managed to suppress the revolt, but this also cost very heavily for the Iraqi people, because the government troops killed probably 100,000 Iraqis during the suppression, and maybe more. So again, and then you had the international embargo, because Saddam, he at first refused to move from Kuwait, then he refused to allow the UN to inspect his weapons of mass destruction. And so the UN embargo continued forever until 2003, until President Bush II decided to conquer Iraq. But when Bush conquered Iraq, this was not the end of the suffering of the Iraqi people. It was just another wave of suffering. Nobody knows how many Iraqis died in the civil war. There was a horrendous civil war, mostly between Sunnis and Shi'is. Some people say 1 million people died. Some people say yes, less than that. But we don't really know. Many people disappeared. The whole thing was very tragic and really horrible. I would say that probably by 2010, 29, the civil war ended, but the Americans evacuated by 2011. All combat troops. They left some tutors to stay and teach the Iraqi military, especially intelligence and so on. But the American combat troops left Iraq by 2011. And ever since, the government of Iraq, which the Americans did not prepare very well for real independence, and they didn't choose the right people. They were not careful enough to avoid corruption, and the corruption was rampant by then. It brought the Iraqis into another phase of crisis when ISIS conquered about 1/3 of Iraq in 2014. Mosul was the capital of ISIS. Mosul is the second largest city in Iraq, mostly Sunni, but also many Christians, many Kurds. And when ISIS conquered the place, it kicked out everybody else, left only the Sunnis. And as the regime of ISIS, we know about ISIS, we know what it was. It was the most horrendous dictatorship based on very extreme interpretation of Islam, which I personally don't think it is really a reasonable interpretation of any religion. So only by 2017, with a lot of Americans' help, the Americans sent troops again, and Europeans, the European Union, Mosul was under the Iraqi military, one division of the whole Iraqi military that could fight. All the rest of them couldn't fight. And some volunteers, militias, but mostly this division, Iraqi division, and American support, managed to liberate Mosul from ISIS. Now, ever since, I'm talking about 2017, it's almost now, the situation has not improved, and that's really something which people outside of Iraq are not widely aware of. Unemployment was rampant. I would say it hasn't changed much between 2017, 2018, and 2021. It hasn't changed much. Today, unemployment in Iraq, and it was like that before, is about maybe 12, 13%. Looks not very high. It is very high because amongst the young people between the ages of, say, 16 and 30, employment is about 40%. That's almost one of every two young people, almost, in Iraq is unemployed. This is a disaster, and it hasn't changed, even though by 2018 already Iraq made some now listen to that, some 80, yes, from $80 billion on oil revenues alone. 80
My goodness.
billion. And yet unemployment never went down. The economy never recovered. I'll explain why. But the facts were, economy never recovered. Government services to the majority of the people. Baghdad is better. But certainly out of Baghdad and in the south, in the Shia south, which was which was hit so hard during the Iraq-Iran war and the Kuwait war, government services are very, very scarce. Health services hardly exist. Education better, but educational equipment, installations, buildings, schools, in a very, very neglected state, terrible state. Kids are coming to study. Kids are so interested to learn, to study, and they are wonderful kids, truly amazing. But the equipment which they have and the housing is horrible, and it's very cold and even wet in the winter. It's very hot. It's scorching hot in summer. No air conditioning for the main reason, for the simple reason that electricity services are below 50% of what people need in the south, in the north as well. But I'm talking now just about the south, and you'll see why. So no electricity, or very little. There is, but very little. Water purification, potable water, yes, there is. But it depends on certain things. Electricity. When there is electricity stoppage, you don't have drinking water. And the economy, the local industry is hardly surviving. There is very little of it. Even the agriculture is suffering, and I explain why. So the situation became from bad to worse between the liberation of Mosul in 2017 and the first mass demonstrations in the south in the summer of 2018. What happened in 2018? July 2018. The temperature around Basra and the south, between Basra and Baghdad, is between 45 centigrades and 52 centigrades. Now, this is usually the case. This is how it was under Harun al-Rashid and the Abbasid dynasty in the 9th century, 8th, 9th, other centuries, AD. Yes, but in the meantime, people had air conditioning. They bought, after 2003, everybody bought air conditioning. And as long as you have electricity, you can at least use part of the day, part of the night, and you have water, part of drinking water, part of the day, part of the, you can still manage. But all of a sudden, by July 2018, the Iranians did two things. First, they stopped all electricity supplies to southern Iraq, and 85% of all electricity in the south in Iraq, south of Baghdad that is, all the way to Basra. 85% of the electricity there is bought, supplied, provided by Iran, bought from Iran. And Iran decided, for whatever reason, they say they didn't get their money and so on. I don't even know if it's true. If it's true, okay, but you don't stop it in July. I mean, there is a limit. Or you go to Baghdad and say, pay us the money, or we should stop. You give some breathing space for the government, for the people. What do? They stopped electricity like a bolt, like a lightning, bolt of lightning, and that's it, stopped. So you have no electricity. You have no electricity. You have no water. You have no air conditioning. And not only that, they stopped there is this river that goes from Iran into the Shuttle Arab, which is the joint waterway of the Euphrates and the Tigris. So this river is called the Karun. The Karun. The Karun River used to bring, until then, until 2018, a lot of fresh water, clean fresh water, into the Shuttle Arab. And if you can process the water from the Shuttle Arab, and the quality of the water is not so bad, what you get at home is reasonable. But when you have no electricity, and when the quality of the water in the Shuttle Arab became very bad because the Karun was no longer flowing into Shuttle Arab, the result was that people were poisoned by bad water. And every day in the summer, July, August, September, 3 months, every day, 4,000 people in the south of Iraq were hospitalized for pollution, for polluted water. So everything is really bad. And this is especially in the south. Now we have to remember, the south, almost every Iraqi who is living in the south is Shi'i, while most people in the north are Kurds, and most people in the center north and west and northwest are Sunnis. It's almost territorially partitioned, historically so. So you have here a problem with many millions of Shia who don't, in the south, whose government is ruling now the country from Baghdad, as a result of the American war against Saddam and the fact that they ended the Sunni hegemonic. I'd say there are many Shias in the government as well, but basically it was Sunni controlled. This Sunni controlled government under Saddam is gone, and now the government in Baghdad is mostly Shi'i. Power became Shi'i territory, if you wish. So the Shi'i South, which is suffering so much, especially because the Iranians stopped everything, is protesting against two enemies. One is their own government that between 2003 and 2018, for 15 years, didn't manage to develop locally, Iraqi energy industry, electricity, gas, everything, nothing. Everything is coming, not everything, about 35% to 40% of all energy is coming into Iraq from Iran, mostly in the south. So in the south, it's 85% Iranian energy. But if the Iranians are stopping everything, you are left with nothing. And the government never developed Iraqi energy in the south, which is very difficult to explain, except for corruption. The Iranians made sure that the people who don't do anything get paid well. And so the first enemy were the Iranians. They stopped the water, they stopped the electricity, and everything is at a standstill, and people are dying. The first enemy is their own government, and the second enemy is the Iranians. And people are marching, large demonstration, marching in the street and shouting, Iran barra barra, Iran barra barra, which means Iran outside, Iran go away, Iran outside. But also, of course, against their own government, which even though it is Shi'i, and should be looking after the Shi'i part of the population. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but at least you would expect it in a country where you had this problem between Shi'is and Sunnis for so many years. They don't care. The government doesn't care. The ministers are, everybody is corrupt. And the officialdom is corrupt. And those whom they appoint in the south to do something are either corrupt or completely inept because they were not professionals. They were appointed in order to get a nice salary. They didn't know anything about what they were doing. The economy and the infrastructure in the south is in a terrible shape, and nothing is happening for 15 years. These demonstrations ended around the end of September, beginning of October. The government tried something to do, not very much, just to calm it down. They managed for a very short time to calm it down. Many were killed, many demonstrators were killed. By the way, the demonstrations were peaceful, but still many were killed by some government troops, by militias. The militias are another story, and I'll come to it. And that ended, I'd say, by the late autumn of 2018, it ended, the protests. But in the meantime, it was clear that the prime minister cannot solve the problem. So there was one prime minister who was kicked out, another prime minister who was kicked out as well. And this happened because of a very interesting influence. Of course, the demonstrations in the first place, which were Shi'i masses against their own Shi'i government in Baghdad. It was very interesting. It was not Sunni Shi'i any longer. The man who joined the fray, so to say, was Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani. Ali Sistani is the leading authority in the Shi'i world. He is more important as a spiritual guide and a religious authority than Ali Khamenei, the leader, the Rahbar, the leader of Iraq. More important, much more. Khamenei is a political leader, but Sistani, who is in Iraq, in Najaf, he is a spiritual and religious leader. So he demanded the resignation of the prime ministers and joined every demand of the revolutionaries. End of corruption, end of Iranian control of the Iraqi economy and the Iraqi military scene, security scene, and the Iraqi government and the Iraqi parliament, end to that, and jobs and infrastructure. These were the main demands. They wanted new elections and so on, which of course makes sense if you want to change the system a little bit, and new electoral law. But the main reason, the main demands were what I said before. Sistani supported it, and for one prime minister went, the other one came, then he went, then there was this kind of provisional government, which doesn't have much authority anyway, only a sort of an intermediate solution until another government is established. Then something happened. By the month of May, exactly, it started a little before, sorry, my mistake. By the month of October of 2019, about a year after the demonstrations of 2018 ended, by October 2019, the demonstrations started again. This time they started from Baghdad, from the center, and spread all the way down to Basra, to the south. Again, Shi'i demonstrations against the Shi'i government for the same two reasons: corruption. If you want, you can also say corruption and inefficiency, which are the same essentially, and Iranian influence again. So again, the prime minister had to resign, Sistani, and the president. President is Kurdish, but he is a very honest and capable diplomat. First of all, he's not corrupt. Between Sistani and the president, they somehow decided that the previous prime minister, who was very pro-Iranian, will no longer do, and they decided on somebody who is not anti-Iranian, but is not, neither is he pro-Iranian. He is pro-Iraqi. And he is not pro-American, but he is certainly not anti-American. He is neutral between America and Iran, but what he is not neutral about is Iraq. His name is, this happened exactly to the day 1 year ago, in May of 2020.
That's right.
His name is Kadhimi, Mustafa al-Kadhimi. He is a human rights activist,
Hmm.
and then he became a leading journalist in Iraq. And then he became the head of the Iraqi Internal Security Organization, the FBI, if you wish, you can call it the Iraqi FBI. Okay, and he was very good at everything he did. Also, he is not corrupt. He had a good name, and people know in Iraq about everything. Eventually, they know you cannot cheat anybody. And so he's not corrupt. He's capable. He succeeded in everything he did. So Sistani, but especially the president, Barham Saleh, he's Kurdish. He doesn't have any power. He doesn't have any divisions. But he recommended it to Sistani, and Sistani agreed. And eventually they managed to go through parliament. He had to get parliamentary vote. You don't go immediately to general elections, but you have to go back to parliament because it needs parliamentary majority.
Hmm.
And eventually, even though the Iraqi parliament is by majority pro-Iranian, they simply realize that if they don't get somebody that the demonstrators will accept as reasonable, they will never end. The demonstrations will never end, and the country is coming into a standstill. So they agreed that this guy would do. Iran didn't like the guy, still doesn't like the guy. But he's not anti-Iranian, but he's not pro-Iranian like most of his predecessors. And they understand that his rule will limit them a bit. But they believe that they have enough power in Iraq already so that he cannot do very much. Even though he's prime minister and officially he is the supreme commander of all armed forces. But now we shall go into two aspects. One, the economy, and the other one, security inside Iran. And why is it so difficult for the new prime minister who made all the right commitments when he came into power? All the right commitments. I mean, everything the demonstrator demanded, he also wanted it to happen. And one thing which, of course, he wants most of all is that all the militias, which today number between 100, nobody knows for sure, 160,000 people to 180,000 people, 70 militia organizations, out of which 66 militia organizations are strongly pro-Iranian. And 4 are not. 4 are working with the Najaf religious leadership, Grand Ayatollah Sistani and others, and they place themselves strictly under the command of the prime minister. But all other 66, they are pro-Iranian. In Arabic, we say, Mia bil Mia, 100%. The problem with his militias, they were created by Sistani himself, because he was afraid when ISIS in 2014 conquered Mosul, there was real danger to Baghdad. So Sistani called upon everybody who wants to join a militia to join a militia, and the government gave them the salaries and equipment and so on, and Sistani supported wholeheartedly this step. He called for it in a big fatwa. The point is that once Mosul was liberated, what's the point of keeping all these 160,000 people, 70,000, underarmed and paid by the government? The equipment, the weapons, the salaries come from the government. There is no reason for it. You have now an army, the regular army, a normal regular state army, numbers the same, it's the same number, about 160,000 soldiers. So you have such a large army, retrain it because it's useless mostly. There's only one division. I would say that in my calculation, you have about 10,000 soldiers in this division. It's an infantry division. They are called the anti-terrorist division. And they are the ones who liberated Mosul in 2017. and they lost about 1/3 of their membership, of their soldiers. 1/3. It's a huge loss.
Yeah.
And now they rebuilt. The commander rebuilt. He's a very good commander, a general. He rebuilt the division. He is now the divisional commander. The Iranians managed to kick him out of his position because he is not pro-Iranian, but eventually the new prime minister reappointed him. Kazemi reappointed him. So this is a very good unit. But you have 10,000 people who are good fighters against 160 and 180,000 militias that I'm not saying that good fighters, but they'll fight. And when you have this proportion, the chances of overcoming the militias are not good. So the first thing that he wanted to do, the new Prime Minister Al-Kazemi, days after he became Prime Minister and the Parliament approved of him, was to control the militias. So he called all the commanders of the militias, about the most important militias, and he was sitting with them, and he told them, guys, you have from now on to see me as your supreme commander. The constitution is, according to that, I am the supreme commander of all the armed forces in the country. They never said no. But the next day, they started blowing up things in Iraq to show him who is boss. And
the militias, the Iraqi militias.
The militias. They started to blow up targets inside Iraq to show him who is boss. Then they started attacking American units, which were helping Iraq to eliminate completely ISIS. These American units still are in Iraqi military camps. So you have an Iraqi military camp. The camp is owned by the Iraqi military, official military. And in that camp, you have a small unit of, say, 300 or 400 American soldiers who are guiding them, who are giving them intelligence because they're not yet very good on that, and who are helping them with air power when necessary. But they're there to fight ISIS. So now the militia started attacking those Americans inside Iraqi army bases. And they killed Iraqi soldiers too. They also killed a few Americans and so on. So the prime minister is stuck. He doesn't know what to do. If he goes to war against them, even if he wins, it means civil war, because each one of them represents a tribe and a very large number of families and so on, of the militia soldiers and commanders. So militiamen and commanders. So he is reluctant to go to a major war against these guys. But at the same time, they control security in Iraq. He does not. And only a few days they attacked another Iraqi base. It's an Iraqi base where the Americans are as hosts, invited by the state to be hosts. And there is a base in Western Iraq, northwestern Iraq, where you have also American Air Force. And the American Air Force is not used against Iraqi targets. It's used against ISIS. So they're attacking them. Of course, the prime minister needs the Americans, but now President Biden decided that all combat troops will be evacuated. So they won't be able to help them very much any longer, except maybe through providing them intelligence. That's all. No air reconnaissance, no air attacks, nothing, because Americans go home. American combat bases, combat forces go home, and only some advisors remain in small numbers. So in a way, the Iranians managed to do what they wanted to do through the militias, and the prime minister is powerless to do anything about it. He's completely neutralized. On the economy, the problem is not just corruption, absolutely corruption, and incompetence on an amazing level, but also Iranian involvement. How? First of all, as I said, perhaps around 35 to 40%, not around, it's between 35 and 40% of all energy in Iraq comes from Iran. Now that's huge dependence, and the Iraqis would like to develop their own. The Iranians are not allowing, simply not allowing them to do it. And the politicians who are supposed to do it don't want to do it because they depend on Iran for handouts and also security. So the Iraqis know, the prime minister, there is a white paper and so on, very clear, how to develop the Iraqi energy sources, gas, oil, further oil, electricity, but he cannot do it. He hasn't done anything yet. The Saudis are ready to help. The Kuwaitis and the Emiratis are ready to help. They say to him, we are going to provide you with electricity, which we shall produce and send to you by high voltage lines, high power lines. It will cost you about half what the Iranians are charging you. And the prime minister is deeply interested, but the Iranians are not allowing it, so he cannot do it. Nothing is happening. About the local industry. Local industry and local agriculture in Iraq are paralyzed, deep freeze. Why? Because they have some problem with energy, but that could be solved. The Iranians will sell them for a high price, but will sell them. The problem is that the Iranians are using a dumping strategy in Iraq. They send cheap and very low quality fruits, vegetables, medicines, electric appliances, cheap cars, even cars, and many other things which Iraq can produce itself, but the prices that they charge are very low. And why are they so low? A, because it's very low quality, but B, because they don't pay border taxes. The Iraqi government does not control its borders. Most of the borders are controlled, especially with Iran, but also with Syria, are controlled by the militias. And the militias do what the Iranians tell them to do. So sometimes the militias are shaking up people who go, merchants who come in and charge them. It's like, highwaymen. Yeah. But sometimes they let them go like that. So a lot of merchandise go in without, the government doesn't make a penny on it because it's without any tax. And the result is that the Iranians are flooding the Iraqi market with agricultural products and with a sort of light industry products. The result is there is no Iraqi private economy, very little. And if you want to do something, the militias will shake you up. The militias are controlling everything in terms of security domestically, and as a result, when you manage to build a profitable business in Baghdad, not in a far-flung city, townlet or village, no, in Baghdad, in downtown Baghdad, they'll immediately implement their system of a very effective system of protection. If you don't pay them, they will destroy you very easily. They'll kill you possibly. So businesses simply cannot function properly. Now you have a lot of businesses, but they are all on the margin, always on the margin, because they pay a lot of protection fee to the militias. If you complain to the police, it's a joke. Police wouldn't do anything because they don't want trouble. Now the police is government police, okay? It's not a militia, but they just won't do anything. So you have this huge problem with the economy, huge problem with security, and the prime minister, to his credit, he's trying to fight the corruption in his own way. He already put on trial a few ex-ministers and director general. Not many, less than 10, but there were thousands of them, less than 10, just to show that's what I would like to do. But he's not, he cannot do very much. And so Iraq is today stuck with Iran. What can he do? Now, what he is trying to do, it's a new way. Whether it works or not, I cannot say. I think maybe it will work in a very limited way, maybe not at all. He managed to mediate between Saudi Arabia and Iran. He invited the top internal security officials from Tehran and from Riyadh. And they met in Baghdad in the office of one of his cabinet ministers. And they discussed how they can, first of all, stop attacking each other, because the Iranians are attacking the Saudis through Iraq. How the Saudis can maybe help Iraq, but the Iranians eventually won't allow it, to my mind. And because the Prime Minister's Kazemi's idea is to take Iraq out of this regional rivalry and just leave us alone. Don't turn Iraq into a battleground between Saudi Arabia, the Emirates on the one hand side, Iran on the other hand side, America, maybe Israel is not involved, but doesn't matter. So will he succeed? I cannot say. But he tried. And there were a few meetings. The Americans are supportive of it. But if the Americans end up by supporting a Saudi-Iranian ceasefire, something like that, but are not helping the prime minister to get rid of the Iranian influence inside Iraq, what has Iraq gained? Nothing. Iraq needs security control. The government needs security control and economic control and border control. And they don't have it. So I would say, what is better for Iraq? Yes, this kind of independence and total uninvolved in any conflict in the Middle East. Not between Saudi and Iran, not between Israel and Iran, not between America. In America and Iran are no longer in conflict. Biden decided to help the Iranians, to promote them, to bring them back to whatever it is. Israelis are a bit worried about it because the whole idea is to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power. Biden thinks he can do it. Israeli strategists believe he cannot do it. But we shall see. We shall see what will happen with the agreement and so on. On the whole, this kind of American pacifism towards Iran is paradoxically strengthening Iranian power inside Iraq. Because Americans already decided, Biden, to take out all combat units, American, from Iraq. The prime minister of Iraq didn't want it, but he accepted it. Some will stay, especially, as I said, advising and technological units and so on. But this means that ISIS now is becoming stronger because European American combat units will leave Iraq. We are still not sure about that, but it looks like it. So what we already have is something very problematic. The Prime Minister, Kadhimi, is now stuck between ISIS on the one hand side, which he can less and less combat, and the militias on the other side, which he couldn't combat even to begin with. So in terms of security, Baghdad security now is in deep trouble. Because either the militias, they kill, they kidnap anybody whom they regard as dangerous to them, Iraqis. They will make him disappear. On the other hand, ISIS is interested in blowing up, central markets and so on in Baghdad. And a few months ago, they just did it, big time, many, many dead. So you have here a government which is really under siege from both ISIS and the militias, from Iran. The Saudis are not capable of helping them a great deal. The Americans don't want to help them a great deal because the Americans are trying to make peace with the Iranians.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult decision for them to support the Iraqi government, even though they know it's necessary, but they would like to work with the Iranians now. So we have this strange situation. And I'd say that Iran is now between a disaster. The situation right now is close to disaster already. And maybe good intents from the prime minister, but I would say paralysis. Now, there is one hope which I think may work or may not, or who knows. By October, like exactly as the demonstrators demanded, by October, the Iraqis are going again to general elections. A year before they should have gone. But that's okay. There is a new electoral law which will make it more difficult, though still possible, but more difficult to terrorize voters, to bribe voters, to cheat, in terms of the ballots. More difficult, but still possible, but at least it's a step forward. So if the demonstrators who really would like to have democracy and non-corruption, non-corrupt government, and independence from Iran, if the demonstrators will be able to marshal enough voting power to the balance, they will support the prime minister in parliament, and maybe it will be easier for him to pass decisions, resolutions. However, you can pass a resolution in parliament, it's not so easy to actually implement it on the ground in the field.
Yeah,
It's
especially when there are so many militias are working there.
Yes, definitely. And the militias, you see, you have to understand the militias. Right? The militias, they never had it so good. See, these 160, between 160 and 180,000 people, that's all. But each of them is coming from a tribe, from a large family, and so on. They get a good salary. I'm not saying that they're becoming rich, they cannot become rich, but they are getting a reasonable salary. They're getting all the equipment from the government, and here and there, small presents from the Iranians. Not much. Iranians don't have a lot of money anyway right now, but yes, a little bit. And their commanders are completely sworn supporters of the Iranians, because all their power is coming from the Iranian support. So let's imagine, even if the prime minister...
Sorry to interrupt. It's a marriage of convenience then.
Say it again?
It's a marriage of convenience then, from the both ends,
Yes.
Iranians and the commanders.
Yes, yes. The Iranians are managing the commanders are managing each one their militia, and the militia is managing Iraq. Well, it's really like, it's done like that, very capably, I have to say. To the Iranians are doing it very well. And the economy, as I said, already controlled by Iraq, is a cash cow, is a milking cow for Iran.
Yeah.
So
and they are bypassing all the bans and troubles, sanctions. Iran is bypassing all the sanctions through Iraq. They are running a parallel economy through Iraq.
Absolutely.
They cannot sell the oil, but Iraq can sell its oil, and then they can sell goods to Iraq on high cost, and they can earn
everything they do now through Iraq. And I'm not saying that it's the same like taking off all the sanctions. No, it's not getting to that level. But yes, Iraq helps them survive. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Iraqi economy is doing their bidding. And so they can do a lot of things. For example, even the Americans, even Trump agreed to give the Iraqis a reprieve. Okay, you can buy Iranian gas, you can buy Iranian electricity, and you can buy Iranian merchandise, which really they're not supposed to do. But you are right. So for the Iranians, Iraq is hugely important, not only as a strategic asset, which of course it is. It's like a buffer zone against anybody, but it's the economy which is so important for them. And how can this prime minister, I don't know, solve it? If he gets a majority in parliament, it's the first step. But even if he does, which I don't know, because you can still terrorize the voters, and the militias will terrorize the voters, which they did last time, 3 years ago. And that's how Parliament has a majority of pro-Iranian parliamentarians. It's very simple. So it's a real bind. Now, if I'm asked, so how would you try to help Iraq to become really independent? I would say that, first of all, you need to help the revolutionaries. They are not even revolutionaries, they're demonstrators, peaceful. They lost about 600 people dead and 20,000 people in wounded. So how can you help them win better percentage of the election, of the votes? There is many ways to do it. But will the Americans do it? The answer is no. Absolutely no. And this is because Biden doesn't want to get involved in anything. Biden wants only now to do China and Russia. He doesn't care about Iran.
So they can enjoy, the Iranians can enjoy their honeymoon now because Biden is there.
Absolutely. I think the Iranians feel it already. You can see it in what they said, how they act. So it's a very sad situation. Can Europe help? Yes. The Europeans are much more reasonable than the Americans on that issue. I'm not saying Biden is bad, not at all. If you compare Biden to Trump, I prefer Biden. But still, about Iran, Biden is not good. And about Iraq, I think he is not good. Even though he means well, but it's a different thing to mean well and to be able to commit. So the Europeans may be helpful to the Iraqis, but somebody has to tell them what to do. And I don't know if there is a lot of dialogue now between the Iraqi government and the Europeans. I'm not aware of it. There is much more now between the Iraqis and the Iranians, the Iraqis and the Americans, but the Europeans are sort of sidelined. I don't know why, but that's a situation. And on the whole, let's put it from an Israeli point of view, if it's interesting to you. Look, as an Israeli, and I've been studying Iraq since, I'll tell you exactly when. I've been studying Iraq since 1977. Okay? So it's
one year before my birth.
There you are. Absolutely. So when you were born, I was already studying Iraq for my PhD. Okay, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the Ba'athi Iraq. Okay, mainly because I also went back, to the Abbasid era and then forward and so on, backward and forward. But basically, yes. So my feeling as an Israeli is that we are not back to Saddam's era. It's not like that. Saddam promised he'll destroy Israel, conquer, like exactly what the Iranians are saying today. We'll destroy the Israelis, we'll conquer Palestine, we shall send all. Saddam was not Hitler, so he said, I don't want to kill the Jews. He said it, I don't want to kill the Jews. I'll just put them on cruises, on holiday cruises, and send them back to Europe. That's all I'll do. He was very humanitarian. So it was not Hitler, no way. But he said Israel cannot exist. And that's what the Iranians say today. We are not back to that because after the Americans kicked out the Baath out of power and created the new system.
Excuse me, Professor. Allow me to interrupt. Not only Americans and Iranian jointly did it.
You are right.
So there was a deep cooperation between America and Iran against Saddam Hussein.
I agree. And this was such a mistake. Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Good point. The same thing happened with ISIS. The Americans and the Iranians cooperated, and once America more or less liberated the great deal to liberate Mosul and the whole north from ISIS, the Iranians took over. Okay.
And right now the same situation is there.
Yes.
America left the field for Iranians. So it is again somehow not a visible but invisible kind of cooperation.
Well, it's complicated. It is and it isn't. But I won't go into it. Basically, the Americans could get some good advice. I put it this way. They need some good advice. But as it is now, Biden is not interested. So in committing anything serious in Iraq to help the prime minister. And as an Israeli, I'll say that we are not back to Saddam Hussein's days. We are not there. I do not expect the Iraqi prime minister, certainly not this prime minister, who is not anti-Israeli. He's not a friend. He's not an enemy. He's pro-Iraqi. That's all. So I don't expect him to launch missiles against Israel. No way. But the militias already have many Iranian missiles that can reach Israel, which they store in their camps inside Iraq. Now, we know that. And we are telling the Iraqi government, we know that. So you better get rid of it. But the Iraqi government cannot get rid of it. So the Israeli problem will be if the government will be too weak to prevent the militias from actually launching such missiles in the case that Israel and Iran will get into a direct war. Now, I hope not. I hope Israel and Iran will never get into direct war. I really do. But you never know. So the Israeli interest is that these missiles will be brought back to Iran and the militias will come under the central government control, and Iraq will be simply, I would love to have peace with Iraq, of course. I'd like to be the first ambassador or just to visit there as a tourist, and I'll be the first tourist, I can assure you of that. But we are fully aware that no prime minister, no president, and no Ayatollah can support peace between Israel and Iraq, like the peace we have now with the Emirates and Morocco and Sudan, for example. It cannot happen because of Iranian influence. But we are interested as a result. We should be very happy, reasonably happy, if Iraq simply is independent. Economically, don't forget, Iraq is a second oil producer in OPEC. The second oil producer today in OPEC. It isn't producing as much as it can because OPEC is limiting it. The Iraqis can go up to 5 million barrels a day. It's huge. It's more than half of what the Saudis are doing. So why not? Let them have fun. It's great. We would like the economy to be controlled by Iraq and not by Iran, the security by Iraq and not by Iran. We would like Iraq to be for the Iraqis. That's the Israeli approach, which is not maximalist. It's just realistic and reasonable. I just end by saying that despite all this huge potential for the Iraqi economy, it's frozen. The economy is frozen. Iraq today, tonight, owes national debt. It owes $113 billion. And it continues to borrow. This is it could pay this within a year or two with its oil revenues. But its oil revenues are going to the private pockets of completely corrupted officials and politicians, and into Iranian pockets. And the Iraqi people are living in poverty. I'd give you just one example. In this kind of very rich oil country, oil and gas, they don't use their gas at all. In this country, today, about 25% of the population are below poverty line.
A country which just sold its oil for $80 billion in a year, having a population of 40 million people, they can distribute $2,000.
Yes. Now, today they sell it for $50 billion a day because oil prices are a bit depressed. But wait a year or two, they'll get again $80 billion a year, and yet they continue to borrow. The secret is not just corruption, of course, corruption, Iranian control, and whatever you like, but there is one more thing. In order to buy off clients, again, in order to create, if I'm an Iraqi politician, and I need to create my own entourage, my own supporters, large body of people, to secure my own position and my own money and income and so on, revenues and so on. I need to employ a lot of people to do nothing. So that's it. Now, I'll do it through the government, of course. And I control the budget because I am part of the system. So 65%, now this is an amazing statistic, 65% of all people employed in Iraq are employed by the government. 65% of all the working power, if you wish, human resources in Iraq, people who are in the working age, are employed by the government. So and the rest are private enterprise, but you really need it to be about 80% private enterprise, 20% government. In Israel, this is more or less the case. In America, 20-25% are government, the rest are private enterprise. In every serious country, that's the way it is. In Iraq, 65% are just employed by government. That include, of course, the 160 or 180,000 militiamen, which is they're working for the Iranians, and the government of Iraq is paying their salaries. But the whole system is working like that. And by the way, 20% of those who get salaries never show up to work. This is how you build your own support group. And you need a lot of money for that. But the government is paid, the money is paid by the government, not by you. It's not your own money, it's a government money. So if you want now employment for the youth, for the young people, 40% of whom are unemployed, if you want to find for them employment, 90% of the employment has to come from the government again, but this is madness. Now, I'll give you just one example and I'll end by that. When he became prime minister a year ago, exactly a year ago, the new prime minister sent his minister of finance to Saudi Arabia. Okay, what did he ask for? I'll tell you. It was amazing. Later on, they developed a lot of ideas about electricity and so on and so forth, and trade and investments. Yes, but his first request about a year ago was, I need from you $4 billion. Okay, alone, just to pay 2 months of salaries.
Oh my God.
Just that. And the Saudis gave him $4 billion to pay salaries. And then the Iranians came to him and said, you owe us for electricity, for gas, for this and that, $4 billion. Give it to us, or we should stop everything again. So he had to pay them $4 billion. So first he paid the salaries, and then he got new loans so he could pay the rent.
Dr. Baram, in the end, sorry to interrupt you. I have a question because the time is shorter now.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you one thing. Do you think that there will be 3 Iraqs, Sunni Iraq, Shia Iraq, and Kurd Iraq?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. First, the Kurds tried to secede. They tried, a couple of years ago, and it failed miserably because Iran closed the border with them, Turkey closed the border with them, Baghdad boycotted them, and they get some money from Baghdad. They had no support from anybody. So they gave up. And they lost a lot by doing this. It was a plebiscite, and the plebiscite said yes, 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 we'd like to be independent. I understand it, but they couldn't sustain a system without connection to Iran, connection to Turkey, connection to Syria, and especially connection to Baghdad. So they cannot succeed. I mean, they can, but the price they have to pay for it, which is so exorbitant that maybe they're right. They don't want it. The Sunnis have been devastated by the American invasion, by the anti-Sunni policies the American mistakenly implemented. It was very sad. They said the Americans made a big mistake. I advised them at the time when they came into Iraq, and I knew it better than I say any officer in the American army. So I gave them some advice. They wanted to follow my advice, but they couldn't. I won't go into details. And eventually, they made all the wrong decisions. And the Sunnis, that's why ISIS became so successful at first. But then after ISIS was defeated in 2017, 2018, 2017 mainly, the Sunnis are devastated. And the example for you is, the proof of that is that now when the Shia South is very, very angry and already demonstrated, now it stopped, it will start again. But it all happened between 2018 and 2021. It's still happening. All 99% of the demonstrators are Shias. The Sunni population is now, I'd say, quiet, almost paralyzed. They don't want more trouble. So they're trying to rebuild the country as much as they can. Mosul is very slowly recovering, very slowly. But you have in Mosul an Iraqi general who is now the governor of Mosul, and he is an excellent governor. Iraqi general, but military, excellent governor. And both Sunnis, Shias, Kurds, Christians, everybody loves him. And he is doing what he can. But he's getting very little from Baghdad. He does what he can from his own resources. So you do have very slow recovery in the Shia area, but it's not quick enough because ISIS now is raising its ugly head again. I don't see Iraq split three ways. Everything may happen. You never know. I don't know. I never know. But I don't think that this will happen. Certainly not very soon. What can happen and what to my mind should happen, definitely, is autonomy. Not a split, but the way the Kurds are autonomous in Kurdistan. The Sunni area, if they so wish, have to be autonomous. And for example, the Basra area, Basra, Nasiriyah, the deep south, they also want to be autonomous. I would say, sure, why not? But splitting Iraq, to my mind, I'm not sure it's good. And in any case, doesn't matter what I think. I don't see it happening.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Baram. Thank you for your time, and it's a wonderful session with you. And I am looking forward. If you have more time, please spare some time, and we would love to learn about Syria, Jordan, and the neighboring countries.
I can talk to you about Syria sometime. Yes.
Yeah,
Can
sure.
be done.
Thank you.
Mr. Mudathir, thank you very much.
It was a real pleasure.
Honor and pleasure.
Thank you.
My
Sir.
honor, my pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.